All right, if we could take our seats, we will begin the meeting. Thank you for everybody for coming out today. May I get roll call, please?
From the council, Mayor Harris,
Here.
Vice Mayor Cardoza,
Present.
Councilmember Boomgarden,
Here.
Councilmember Espindola,
Here.
and Councilmember Shaw.
Here.
And from the Board of Supervisors, Chairman Conant,
Here.
Vice Chairman Sullinger,
Here.
Supervisor Flores,
Here.
Supervisor Whitaker,
Here.
and Supervisor Ziegemeyer.
Here. Very good. Everybody please stand. We'll have Councilmember Dave Shaw lead us in the pledge.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, very good. So as you all know, we're here for a special workshop regarding homelessness in our community. That is the only item on the agenda. We have a total of 5 brief presentations, kind of as an update on some issues that have been pending before us and things that have happened since our last meeting. The case in point of this meeting, however, is to have a discussion amongst us to try to come up with some action items, if you will, some bullet points, some way to steer the ship in the direction towards resolving this issue, if not worldwide or nationally, at least here locally for our purposes here. So we look forward to that. I do have 2 speaker cards here. Members of the public may address the City Council and the Sutter County Board of Supervisors concerning any item, I should see the item, that has been described in the notice of this meeting. I have 3 speaker cards. If anybody else is present that would like to speak after these folks, please feel free. I'm going to call up Nancy Albrecht first, please, to the podium. And Nancy, if you would please state your name and address into the microphone for the record, I'd appreciate it. And Steve, you'll be right after her. And then followed by, it looks like Dorothy Camp, but I can't quite. Yes. Okay.
Nancy Albrecht, you want my address?
If you would care to state it.
Okay, yes, well, it's part of my speech, yes. No, I live on 2nd Street, at the end of 2nd Street, and in Yuba City, and I would just like to request that the council look into changing the chain link fence, the type of fence that goes around the 2nd Street residences, the backyards, actually, of the 2nd Street residences. It's a heavy chain link fence at the moment, which is continually cut through on both ends, the north and the south end, in order that the homeless use the top of the levee as a road, and then ultimately they come down through our property to get back on the city street. Instead of having the city continually pay to have that fence monitored and to have it replaced, I would like to see a fence there made like they're putting up at schools, a heavier metal type fence that you can't cut through with simple bolt cutters, because that's the situation that we have right now with the fence that the city put up around our properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Dorothy Camp. I live on the corner of Grant and Plumas. I already have an issue with homeless people coming by my house. About 2 weeks ago, I had an incident where on garbage day, 2 people came by, it was a male and female. They came by and they rummaged through my neighbor's recycle, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But they pulled everything out and threw it on the ground. Then when I came out and I said, "Excuse me, are you going to pick that up?" The female was quite compliant. She goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I did." I said, "No, you left it all in the street." She went back to pick it up. The male got really angry and confronted me with a steel pipe and said, "It's all your fault if you helped me." I said, "Why What do you want me to do? Give you everything for free? I pay my taxes on my property. If I don't pay them, guess what? You're going to come take my house. But they can do whatever they want. And I was very annoyed. I didn't call the police because by the time they would have got there, then I would have been actually a point for them to come back and do it again and again and again, because they would have come back, because that's the kind of man he was. So what are you going to do to prevent this from happening? You know, because these people come by every Wednesday. My son says they congregate at the 7-Eleven and they come through the whole town. There's people that don't even know that these people are coming through at 4 o'clock in the morning and throwing the trash on the ground. They don't know how their trash is getting on the ground. You know, it's ridiculous. If I'm paying for garbage, I don't care if it's on the street. It should be the property of the garbage people, and my property is in there, and nobody else should be allowed to take anything out of there, because this is going to cause a problem. These people are in my neighborhood, and talking about they go to the health department for treatment. No, they go down the street from me to Alamar to get their drugs. That's their treatment center. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. This is Steve Albrecht, 329 2nd Street, Yuba City. And yes, yet another example of the term homelessness often being a euphemism for mentally ill and dangerous. I see it all the time on my property. I had to report a trespassing issue today and yesterday. And so on the average, probably about 2 a week. But that wasn't the topic that I chose here today. My topic is regarding the recent Appeal Democrat article about the homeless camp, the temporary homeless camp proposed for Whitaker Hall. So I'm wondering where this idea came from, because the last time I checked, over the last months, the topic at these meetings has been how to remove the homeless camp from 2nd Street to put it to a better facility to service the homeless. And that answer was the Live Oak Boulevard homeless camp. So I've been told by supervisors and city council members that, yes, we're working on that. I've been told by by law enforcement as well that, yeah, we're actively working on removing this camp, putting them to that facility. So I'm wondering why is this idea, Whitaker Hall, temporary homeless camp, temporary usually means permanent. Where did this idea came from? So where are there other, aren't there any other options? And this idea is, despite the fact that a recent advisory committee did not suggest Whitaker Hall as an option. So that was not their recommendation. Residents in our area do not want Whitaker Hall as that option. And I have had discussions with supervisors about that, and they have reassured me that you all are working actively to remove this camp from 2nd Street to another location, most likely Live Oak Boulevard. This is despite the fact that the FAA has stated we really advise against this. I mean, this is like you're putting a homeless camp next to an airport. It's kind of like storing gasoline next to a water heater. So potentially it's very lethal. And I can't imagine why law enforcement would be for this idea, because here you're housing a group of people that they want to be in this element. The river bottoms, the levee. The river bottoms is where they can kind of mix in the night, because many of them are criminals, drug abusers, and involved in crime. So please explain this idea. I'm sure there's an idea or a reason that I'm just not understanding why Whitaker Hall is now suddenly an option. Because it certainly doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem like it's in the community's interest. So I'm not seeing that at all. Thank you.
Through the chair.
Who just said?
Over here.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
in the dark.
Just to respond to Mr. Albrecht, first and foremost, I wouldn't use the Appeal Democrat as my only source of factual information. I mean, that's, I'm just giving you a heads up. And secondly, I think the Sutter County Board of Supervisors, I don't know the official date, but we voted on never putting a homeless shelter at Whitaker Hall. That was already voted on by the Sutter County Board of Supervisors. So I don't know where you're getting the information that Whitaker Hall is going to be a homeless shelter site. It's already been voted on by the Board of Supervisors, and it was opposed, so.
As a proposed idea.
Relocation center was the word.
Relocation processing center.
All right.
Haven't heard it.
All right. There we go. Elaine, you're up. Thank you.
Elaine Miles, and I was not going to speak, but hearing the people speaking before me, I have seen this stuff happen. I drove to Levy District 1 meeting, and that starts at 8 o'clock in the morning. This was about a month ago. I saw two young girls. I would say they're in their 20s. I'm old, so that's a girl. But they were both drinking out of large whiskey bottles and pulling their homeless stuff. When I went to a Levy District 1 meeting before, Whitaker Hall, I saw some movement down there. And there's ball clubs down there. I drove down there, and three guys took off. They were breaking into the candy place that you can buy this stuff. But even on top of that, I went to a Tea Party meeting over at the church that they're having it at now. I left early. I walked out the wrong door, and I saw homeless people going through garbage cans. And one of them looked like he was trying to open a car door. I should have called the police because cars were broken into. I figured out how to get out of there, went home, and thought nothing of it. The next day I found out that people's cars were broken into. We have got to stop this. And let's quit giving them money just to be out there wandering around. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Anybody else care to say anything? Feel free. You would, ma'am? Well, actually, if you want to have a question, right, you have a question, if you're going to speak, we need to have you up here, please. I know it can be cumbersome.
Janice Shannon, Yuba City Planning Commission, and former chair of the ad hoc committee. All I wanted to know is, are we going to have the opportunity to speak at any other point during this workshop? Thank you. Or is this the only time the public can speak?
It depends on how things go, but I have no problem with hearing from you. It's part of the reason why you're here. It's kind of out of protocol. We usually speak ahead of time. But if you're asking is you want to hear what we have to say and then give us feedback,
Yes.
I have no problem with that. I don't think the rest of the folks have a problem with it either. That's why we're here.
Okay, and since I made the effort of getting up here, I'm going to speak. One of the things that I have said repeatedly, homeless is not the real core issue. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of a lot of other issues. Lack of jobs, lack of housing, especially mental health issues. And we have such large numbers, it's very difficult to put this in a one-size-fits-all box because there's mental health issues. There are young people that are matriculating out of the foster care system. There are a number of reasons that people become homeless. They lose their job and can't find a job. They can't afford housing. You know, there's a million issues. And we have a number of really wonderful service agencies that are doing their best to serve the families and the vets and everybody. But we have to keep in mind this is not a one-size-fits-all problem, and there is no single solution that we're ever going to be able to implement to take care of the problem. Biggest part of it is lack of housing in our community. We as a government need to, is that my time?
You're good.
Okay. We need to create public and private sector partnerships with developers. Private developers can build housing without implementing Davis-Bacon, depending on the source of the funding. But there are so many creative ways that we can address this issue. We need to explore all of those ways and try to stop shoving it in a box. Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
this
Jen.
isn't the last you've heard from me tonight.
I'm sure it's not. If you have a couple minutes, you say there's a lot of ways that you're aware of to address it. I'd be interested in knowing what those are, if you get a chance.
A lot of ways of addressing the issue.
Whatever you said at the tail end, you said there are a lot of ways. Whatever ways you're aware of, even offline, I'd be interested in knowing what you've heard, in case you've heard something that I haven't.
I don't know that I'm fully aware of what you're asking. There's a lot of money in the pot for all kinds of different types of eligibility. There's money for vets, there's money for families, there's money for this, there's monies for that. And sometimes we have to have a city match or a county match. And I'm sure that you all from the board and the council know about matching funds. But until we have more housing, whether it's changing zoning and implementing something to encourage tiny homes, there's just a lot of opportunity and a lot of creative ways that we can address the issue in small increments. Taking a lot and setting it up for tiny homes where you can get 6 to 10 tiny homes for seniors, for example, is a lot easier to bite off and manage than trying to build 200 units of low-income housing. I do this. I work for a developer that does low-income housing in other parts of the state. So I work with the funding and I work with these applications all the time. And you do have to be creative. And there's some developers that are way more creative than others. But it is possible. And we can look at other states. But the housing is the issue. You know, mental health is an issue. Homelessness is an issue. Jobs is an issue. I mean, all of these things are pieces of a puzzle. And without looking at each piece, you can't see the picture that the puzzle is creating. So, you know, and anytime you want to get together, I'd be happy to bend your ear for days.
All right, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions of me now?
Pass that to Daryl, please. All right, anybody else care to speak?
I just wanted to ask one thing. Why are 47% of the country's homeless people coming to California? We need to
Anybody
stop
else care
that.
to speak at the podium? Nope. All right, so we'll move on to our first presentation, which is Brad McIntyre.
Good evening, council members and supervisors. I'm Brad McIntyre, the Community Services Director for the City of Yuba City. My intent this evening is just to kind of give everyone a recap of what took place at our first joint workshop regarding homelessness back on May 31st. It started with Steve Smith. Actually, let me back up. At the beginning, just as of this evening, we heard from quite a few concerned citizens. And then we've heard from Steve Smith, who gave us an overview on the county's efforts regarding homelessness. We heard from Kaya Galicia, who gave us a presentation on 14 Forward. We had Chelsea Burke, who provided statistics on the homelessness in our bi-counties. We had Scott Thurman, who you will hear from again this evening, who is a consultant with Sutter County regarding homelessness, and at that time he educated us on the Homeless Consortium. And then last but not least, we had Mr. Bendorf from Yuba County, who discussed the bi-county adopted strategic plan. At the end of that 4-hour workshop, it was council and supervisors' desire to have another workshop, and this is why we are here this evening. So forward this evening, we'll have, as of right now, 2 individuals that will be speaking. It'll be Mr. Steve Smith, the interim CAO for Sutter County, regarding projects related to homelessness and activities. We'll have Mr. Thurman, who will talk on a variety of topics, one starting with state funding, as it was discussed a few minutes ago, housing updates, the New Haven project and what is now what is also being called a new woodland model, if you will. And so, which is not, let me back up, which is not in replacement of New Haven project, but the woodland model is something separate. So at this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Smith to come on up.
Through the chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Question, Brad, do we have copies of the presentations or documentation or anything else?
I do not believe so.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have any slides, so you do have a copy of mine, because I have no slides. Thank you, Honorable Mayor, Council, and Supervisors. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on this topic. I know a lot of information was covered at the prior joint meeting, so I'll be brief. I am going to give just a recap, but I don't think I have more than a couple minutes of information. It seems the primary purpose of this meeting is to talk about solutions. And we have solutions in play, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But as Ms. Shannon mentioned, there's no one way to address this, and no jurisdiction across the country has become the model for exactly what to do. The causes are many and varied, so, and we all know, I think, that we're not going to make everyone happy no matter what we do. And it's a tough situation to be in, so I think it's admirable and takes courage for you to have this meeting and address it. And I'm not just saying that because half of you are my bosses. Sutter County, Yuba City, other organizations, the nonprofits, service clubs, and residents of the county have been implementing a variety of solutions to address the causes for many years. The county helped create the first shelter in the community by establishing a home for Casa de Esperanza in the late 70s. Regional efforts at large kind of began in the 80s with the establishment of the Yuba Sutter Homeless Committee, which was mostly residents of local residents of churches and nonprofits. That committee evolved into the Yuba Sutter Homeless Consortium, which is supported by the county HHS departments of both Sutter and Yuba County. And the consortium is the federally recognized local continuum of care, which conducts the local point in time count. And Sutter County's epidemiologist is the person who supports a lot of the data gathering and interpretation of efforts of the consortium, among other folks from both counties. Sutter County's HHS department's extensive efforts to aid the homeless have resulted in housing solutions for approximately 1,500 people over the past 3 years. I know it's easy to look around and see what's going on now and think that things haven't been done. It's just that there's this nationwide epidemic of homelessness that nobody has all of the resources to address. So about 300 families and over 400 individuals have been housed through the CalWorks Housing Support Program. 58 residents with behavioral health issues have been housed in county-owned housing through the PATH program. And 103 individuals of either advanced age or precarious medical conditions have been temporarily housed in motel rooms, an effort that HHS has been putting on, and 37 of those were subsequently permanently housed. And we don't just house people and hope that everything goes okay. We continue to case manage. So I do know of those 37, 32 are still permanently housed. And we continue to provide services and help them see what eligibility they have for income, help connect them with other service providers, medical help, et cetera. Most recently and soon to open, which we're going to talk more about in a bit here, is the shelter at 1965 Live Oak Boulevard, which is officially named Better Way. Better Way will house up to 40 individuals on a rotating basis with mandatory participation in services and a primary effort to find permanent housing. At this time, tough sheds have been ordered. A general layout has been created, which you'll see in just a bit here, and the operational contract is under review at the Salvation Army's corporate headquarters. So just kind of in summary, the local governments and probably many of the people in this room who I know are members of service clubs and other nonprofits have been addressing homelessness for years. Like I mentioned, the difference now is that there's a national epidemic and almost every community is dealing with it. So just like the problems that cause homelessness are many and varied, the solutions need to be as well. And I think it's something we're chipping away at. We will also address the Regional Housing Authority's application for the tax credits for the New Haven project, and also some of the other programs that are going on in the county, so and city. So that concludes some of my thoughts and comments on what the homeless-related activities are in the county at the moment, and we can speak more about 1965 Live Oak, or Better Way, as we're going to brand it. We've been working with the EDC on that, with Brenda Stranix, much like Yuba County has successfully done, and we look forward to more ideas and being able to address them as directed. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Any comments?
Yeah, through the mayor. Steve, I was just going back to the 1,500 that we've moved into housing over the past 3 years. When we did our point-in-time count, that number keeps rising. So do we have the stats on, has any of the 1,500 returned back to being homeless? Do we need to look at the 1,500 being on top of the almost, I think it was roughly 1,000 that the count came in at between the counties here? I'm trying to figure out how those two numbers correlate, because 1,500 sounds great, but when we look at the point-in-time count, it keeps going up. So can you tell me how these two numbers relate to each other?
I could be off, but I thought the point-in-time count this year went down slightly, right? Okay, so it did go down slightly, and we're one of the few jurisdictions that that's happened in, and it's because of efforts like this that we're all making. Those numbers, as I mentioned, and you could have missed it, but they're over 3 years, and the point-in-time count is annual, and people are going to cycle in and out. And as I mentioned, the permanent housing through the motel program, where we then took some of them and found them, of 32 of the 37 are still permanently housed. So definitely people will cycle in and out, and that's why we continue to case manage throughout the process, because even once people are in permanent housing, something could happen. They're probably more at risk than the average person, right, to go back into homelessness. So we continue to case manage and provide behavioral health, career resources, working with One Stop, and whatever other resources they need.
Okay, yeah, thank you. What I was trying to get was, is the 1,500 a separate number? But it sounds like there's a lot of overlap potentially between the two, and there's no way to delineate at this point how many of the 1,500 are still in our point-in-time count that cycled back through, and it's not, our number plus 1,500, it's...
Right, yeah, and I would say some of the 1,500 were likely precariously housed, where we got them before they likely would have become homeless, got them the CalWorks or other money that they needed to maintain a home. And then as far as how many have cycled through, I don't know if we have all of those statistics, but we may be able to provide some of those at a future event or meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Your comments?
Through the mayor. Councilman Shaw, I would suggest that looking at the point-in-time count is what I think you're referring to, and that happens every year. And so we also have the Homeless Management Information System, where perhaps some of those numbers would be tied into that system, correct, Steve? So
Yeah, that's correct.
Would you like to expand a little bit on that to help would you need that or no? You're good? Okay.
No, I'm good. I'm looking at the numbers here because, we said we put 1,500 in. I'm just trying to figure out if we got 1,500 more people that we've taken care of and still ended up at our point in time count, or if there's overlap. And he's clearly identified that there's overlap, and it's a good number, so.
Yeah, there's two methods that we tend to count our homeless population counts. One of them is specifically for HUD, an annual reporting, and the other is a system that we have been using as the county, as Steve mentioned, for many years, that actually tracks them into the process. As once they enter the system, where do they go from there? And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that.
All right, anything else? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Thurmond.
Mr. Mayor and supervisors and council members, there's a couple of things that I'll dwell on today, and if you have questions in the middle of my presentation, there's a lot of information. Feel free to ask those questions. I'm going to actually ask Neil Hay to come up, and we'll talk about the site. Am I the right one?
Do you want to, I have this presentation.
The presentation.
That's on there.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so Neil will talk about.
Good evening, Neil Hay, Director of Development Services for Sutter County. So the property has its address, 1965 Live Oak Boulevard, the location of the county's behavioral health facility. So this essentially is about 0.4 acres that's behind the facility, northeast corner. The black is an asphalt parking lot that we've essentially created a layout that shows essentially 20 tough shed units, housing units that are 10 feet by 16 feet with 8-foot walls, 10 feet overall. We've provided essentially the amenities that there'd be portable restrooms, there's water at the site, there's power at the site for charging stations and light. There's an existing shade tree that you can see. There is an 8 by 40 foot temporary office trailer that would be utilized for the operational staff. We show some black lines along what essentially is the left side of the area that essentially is a fence that essentially separates the facility from the county facility. The means and method of essentially having the clients come to and from the facility would be primarily the Hands of Hope van would essentially bring the clients to the facility, essentially utilize the asphalt parking area as a turnaround. Any intake or information that need to be shared with the operational staff could occur at the trailer. There will be essentially a gravel path to the various housing units where residents would be essentially 2 per. We're going to provide one sea container essentially for personal storage. We'll be providing essentially a dog or cat kennel for essentially each client for essentially one animal on the property. The facility does have essentially it'll be bounded on a fence on all sides. At the very top of the page is an existing opening in the fence that does lead to the levee. So that would provide a means and a mechanism for the clients to get to the levee and go up and down as I'll say is customary currently. But otherwise, for patients and clients that need to go to, for example, Hands of Hope for showers and laundry facilities, the van would come and take them. Essentially, meals would be provided at this facility for the clients. Any questions that I could answer?
Sorry, it takes me a while to get over here. I'm curious as to the reasoning why you would keep the fence opening to the levee.
Well, one, it is a means of access that they currently utilize, and so I'll say that's one mechanism and reason for having it and stuff. If for some reason operationally it made sense to close it off, then we'd be able to do that. But I'll say currently it is certainly utilized.
Through the mayor. Mr. Hay, what kind of security have you allowed for on this particular facility, or are you envisioning?
So the county provides, essentially through a private security company, 2 security guards on the premises for essentially the entire facility, which includes, we'll say the building and the parking lots out front, as well as the what will be the project behind the building.
Is that 24/7?
Yes.
Through the mayor. So Neil, I take it that we're not putting a gate up there that we could close for security purposes in the evenings?
For
For the back side of that?
So we can. Right now it's an existing opening. But
Oh.
yes, we can close it. Essentially some of the concerns that we've had is that one, I'll say the levee is certainly utilized by a number of people at this time. Having I'll say the fencing and the gates on essentially is the west side of the shelter, essentially separates the county's patients for behavioral health from the clients of the shelter.
Thank you.
Yeah, through the mayor. At the previous presentation, when this was presented by the county, it was supposed to be completely secure.
Okay.
The opening was not supposed to be there, and there's supposed to be a double gate coming in the front. And we were told that, as you said, they would be transported during the day. One of the main concerns that the residents and the businesses in that area have had is the traffic up and down the levee.
Okay.
And yet we're going to put basically a 14 forward there and not have it to where it is what was told to us many months ago. I know from the people that I represent, we need to address that because that is a security risk, and that does nothing to slow down the flow of traffic that has been a major concern to the businesses in that area.
Okay.
So
Then we can add a gate. So essentially it'd be a 3-foot wide by 6-foot tall man gate. Okay. Any other concerns that you'd like to see addressed?
Through the mayor, I just have a question, and Supervisor Solinger brought up the conversation of security. How is that being coordinated with our police department? Because would that not be in our jurisdiction?
Okay. Thank you, Steve Smith again. We plan on having quarterly meetings with between the sheriffs and the sheriff's office, and the police department. And I think our first should be before operations begin, so we'll plan that, and then we'll continue to have quarterly meetings to see what the impact is, if any, and hopefully none, on the police department.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Neil.
And this is some general information also about the site as well, and what would be taking place there as far as infrastructure. So you see that general information, and you see the unit sizes. And at this juncture, the actual units should be arriving in August. And then concurrently, there'll be work on grading and drainage on the site as well, and the perimeter fencing. And then also, I've been asked to share a little bit about potential funding sources as well. First, let me just ask, are there any other questions related to the shelter project?
What's the capacity?
Excuse me?
The capacity?
40 individuals, so
40?
20 tough sheds,
Thank
2 in each unit. And then
One more question here.
Scott, is this couples only, or are you gonna, or two, or is it gonna be husband and wife, or significant other type setup, or what?
Well, your average unit will have 2 singles unrelated.
Okay.
And each individual will allow to have no more than 1 pet. And we are hearing from 14 Ford in their experience that the pet population will fluctuate. Sometimes they're down to almost 0 pets. And on average, it seems like they're somewhere around 20% of their population have pets.
All right.
Okay. All right. So continuing on to funding, the funding situation within the state of California. As I've shared numerous times, the amount of funding that is being made available at this juncture is more funding than I've seen in my 30 years of working in housing and homeless services in the region. I believe there'll be even more funding. So this is the general landscape of funding that's available, and we can also share this document with you so you have that information. And I just wanted to share about a few highlights regarding some of the sources. One of the sources that will be allocated regionally within the region, I would say by the last quarter of 2019, is the HAP program, and I'm sure many of us have heard of the HEAP program. The HAP program is HEAP times 2, I guess you could say it. So I don't know where they came up with that name, but that's what they're going with. It's, for the most part, the same funding criteria as the HEAP program. You'll see the eligible uses there. And it's designed to be very flexible for jurisdictions to plan out services. And also, I would say most jurisdictions are going to utilize this funding for actual brick and mortar type projects. But it can also be used for services. It can focus on emergency shelter type projects as well as permanent housing. And as far as the allocation, previously with HEAP, the funding that was allocated locally, $2.5 million, was fully allocated towards to the Sutter Yuba Homeless Consortium. This time around, there'll be a split where both counties again will receive funding, and along with the Sutter Yuba Homeless Consortium. The expectation of the state is that the three entities work together and figure out an overall plan for how to allocate the funding. So at some juncture, the counties and the consortium will have to come together and meet and decide how to allocate the funding. If I had to guess about the amount that's going to be made available, I would say it's somewhere near what we had available previously, maybe a little bit more, 2.5 million. But again, it'll be split between the three entities. And you see the general breakdown there. And actually, I'm sorry, this is moving on to SB2. So SB2, as I've shared previously, this is ongoing funding that will be made available through the state. And what you'll want to note within this can be used again for a variety of different operational means. It can be used for programs that focus on sheltering and housing. And there's a few other programs that it can be used for as well, and we'll provide that information at a later point. But as stated, approximately $250,000 a year will be coming towards Yuba City. At least that's the initial estimate. And the counties will be able to apply for funding on a competitive basis. So how we might want to approach this as well is for the counties and the city to come together and say, hey, how can we work together to plan out this particular funding source? Because whether it's balance of state or the allocation, it'll have similar uses. Any questions so far? Can you go back one slide, please? Yes. NOFA. Notice of funding available. And then also there'll be some additional funding being made available for regional planning. And this is not just within the Sutter Yuba region. The expectation is that counties of similar size and perhaps that are adjacent to one another work together to plan on a regional basis. So it might be in our best interest to work with a Yolo County or an El Dorado, so adjacent counties of similar size, and create some type of overall plan for the region. I am going to dialogue with them about how they're allocating this funding, because it may or may not make sense to work with a Yolo County. They might be dealing with an entirely different situation, for example, or an El Dorado County, which I know is entirely different. So I will be dialoguing with them about that to see how much flexibility there is. And perhaps we can call Sutter Yuba a region within this process. But there'll be funding allocated for that.
Through the mayor.
Yes.
Scott, could you go back 3 slides, I think?
1, 2, 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did the state come up with those figures, and how would those monies then be divided by jurisdiction?
So I'll answer the second question first. The numbers, the allocations are going to be based off of the 2019 HUD point-in-time count, which has not been certified at this point. And so that will likely be certified sometime during the last quarter of the year. And then, the amounts that were allocated to the COCs and to the counties, that was a negotiation process with the governor and the legislature. And within this process, the county had a good lobbying team on this one because they were shut out of the last process, and they're part of this process this time around.
There also was a reduction because there was funding specifically for 13 cities as you're listing, correct?
Yes. So the 13 largest cities are going to receive an allocation that's separate than the other two. So 190 million to COCs and 175 to counties.
So for the county formula would include that point in time count, as you mentioned, that is not finalized.
Yeah, that is a great question because the point in time counts are not certified by county. They are certified by COC. So how they do that exactly, remains to be seen. We actually asked this question of the HEAP staff, and they did not want to answer. They wanted to move on from the question. So we have to figure that whole scenario out.
Okay. How are we going to figure it out?
Well, the state is going to decide on a number, and we might have some questions about it to make sure it's a fair allocation.
Okay, thank
But
you.
locally, we'll have to decide. Okay, another source you want to be aware of, No Place Like Home. And this is the big dog in the race, if you will. $2 billion available for housing. And there has already been one round of funding that's been made available. And this is actually a good source. It's a little complicated because depending on how many units you want to build determines how much local funding has to be added to the project. It's basically a scenario where if it's 20 or less units, the state will pay for the vast majority of the project. Anything over 20, they will only pay for 51% of the entire project. So within this process, it's likely that the next NOFA is going to come out in September of this year. And for projects that are seeking to apply in September, they basically have to have their site selected already, and they have to have a plan for how they're going to address housing on that particular site. So what that might mean for you all is that you might have proposals under No Place Like Home that will need to be approved fairly quickly in order to take advantage of the next round of funding. And then also there's some short-term planning grants that are being...
One question here, Scott.
Okay. Short-term planning grants that are
We have
being
one
made
question here, Scott.
Oh, sorry.
Go back to that No Place Like Home. Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So are you aware of any Yuba or Sutter or any jurisdiction considering to apply for some of these funds?
Yeah, there's been some local dialogue and with Sutter County, and then also with Habitat for Humanity has been dialoguing about some potential projects as well. So there's nothing that's solidified at this point in time, but there has been some dialogue, and really we're in a situation where that dialogue needs to go into action sometime within the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Through the mayor,
Yes.
is tiny homes, is that fall into the criteria of what we're talking about right now?
Absolutely. The general rule with the State Department of Housing is that a housing unit has to be on a permanent foundation. And so that's the general rule. And then just very quickly, short-term planning grants will be made available to incentivize housing production within jurisdictions. And the reason I bring up this particular slide is it really does seem, and if I might have the latitude to be straightforward here, it does seem like it's a situation where the governor is setting it up where he is going to benefit or provide benefit to jurisdictions that seek to increase affordable housing, and he is planning to punish those jurisdictions that do not. And that's where it seems to be heading, and that's what we're hearing from the state level. So just being aware that this funding is available to help jumpstart housing production. And then this is just a general list very quickly of the different funding sources that the county will either receive an allocation for or they might decide to compete for. So there's quite a bit of new funding that's being made available. Any questions?
Probably a simple question, but somewhat complex. How do they define affordable housing? Because that's going to be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction when you talk about the last grant you talked about.
Right. So generally what happens with an application source is that they'll provide a table, and there's a formula that you use to determine what the average one-bedroom unit is going to rent for. And then on an annual basis, they will provide a new formula or a new table to determine what the rental rate will be for that particular unit. So the state controls the maximum amount of rent. Mm-hmm. Any additional questions? Okay. And then also I've been asked to briefly share about the project that's taking place in with the City of Woodland and a local nonprofit called by the name of Friends of the Mission, and also in partnership with the County of Yolo. It's called the East Beamer Way Neighborhood Campus, and it is they have it actually located on a piece of property that is owned by the city. That is actually in the county, but it's owned by the city, and it is a distance away from the city center. It's also about 0.83 miles away from the nearest bus stop, and the city is taking some measures to mitigate that particular issue that I'll explain in just a second. And this is the basic setup. So this particular site will be just over 5 acres. It'll have a 100-bed shelter, and you'll see that shelter at the bottom there, and then a 60-bed treatment program, and then 60 housing units, a mix of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom, and they'll be set up as duplexes with full solar. And the total cost of this particular project is in the range of about $15 million. And to date, the city and its partners have raised approximately half of the funding at this juncture. And the planning process has taken place a little less than a year is when the planning process started. So you can see the overhead picture of it, and there'll be parking available as well. And these homes is what you would define as tiny homes. They're actually going to be manufactured homes, and there's a local manufacturer actually that's half a mile away from the actual site. And this is just some of the pictures of the site, the plan design. And you see the layout of the units. Again, a mix of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. And as I mentioned, they're going to be providing transportation resources to the site, and also have a scenario where the vast majority of the services are going to be provided on site. And one of the things you'll want to note about this particular project is once there was a location selected, and everyone, the city and the county, got behind that location, that's the point in which it seemed like the money began to flow towards the project. And right now, having raised over $7.5 million to date, it makes it that much easier to pursue the remaining 7 million because you've already got some skin in the game. So that's just a general strategy. If a jurisdiction is able to select a site and invest some resources into it, that really is a good starting point, and it's a situation where the money tends to follow. Any questions?
Yep.
How far did you say it was from the city center?
You know, I would say it's about 1.2 miles.
Oh,
so,
that's not that far. Okay.
Yeah. 0.83 from the
0.8.
nearest bus stop.
0.83, okay, 0.83, okay.
Yes. And it was something that we had to deal with because one of the major funding sources here is No Place Like Home. And they did have a criteria where you had to have transportation available within a half mile. And so we threw at them a pretty broad plan for transportation, which helped mitigate that particular issue.
Through the mayor. Could you go back a couple of slides? I want to get those numbers as far as how many total people. It was a 100 bed shelter, and how many people for 15 million is this going to take care of?
So at this particular site, 160, 220. Yeah. And what's going to happen within this is the current shelters that are being utilized in the city of Woodland are going to be repurposed. And I think the total increased footprint overall is well over 200.
So their current facilities that they have are going to be merged into this one. Is that what you just said?
The current facilities that they have are going to be repurposed, and the current facilities are closer to the downtown area. They will be turned into, one of the facilities will be turned into a family shelter, and the other one will be a sober living facility.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Nice.
So through the mayor, Scott, so these are specific, are male only or female? How's the divide?
It'll be a mix.
Okay.
And there'll be even at the within the 60 units, some families. Our hope is that within the 60 units there'll be some families, but all families who will be sheltered at the current location that is near the downtown area.
Okay.
Through the mayor.
Yep.
Scott, I have a few questions here for you.
Mhm.
You're probably going to be the best to answer these. Okay, so we got to figure out something to do. They're going to spend $15 million to take care of 200 people. So we have 760 homeless. In order to enforce the rules of no camping, no parking, and so forth, if we have a place for rest, a shelter, storage containers to put their stuff in, hold it for 90 days or so forth, and they don't come back and pick it up in 90 days, it goes to Recology. Can we enforce the rules of no river bottom parking, camping, no loitering downtown? I mean, if we have a place for them that will hold the capacity, is that possible?
Well, I'm looking towards county council on this one.
So Supervisor, I think one of the things to note about these programs, this is not necessarily permanent housing, if I'm not mistaken, so people will move through that project. So it's really not just serving 200 people, it's serving much larger numbers, is that correct?
Yeah, the shelter and the treatment program, that will be the case, but the 60 units will be permanent housing.
Okay.
But my question, okay, so you've been down to 2nd Street a few times. Every time I've been down there, I find it really hard to believe that certain individuals that are down there in the river bottoms are going to want to go to a 1440 or move forward. They're not going to go. So we have to put some teeth in it. We got to figure out something to do here. And instead of saying pretty please, if we have the shelter, have the storage container, can we talk to their attorneys and say, hey, guys, there's got to be a solution here. We have the shelter, we have all this. We can't force them to move. Can we forcefully help them to move, or?
We can enforce our ordinance, though, when we have a facility, an alternate facility. Right now, because we don't have a facility, we can't enforce the ordinance.
And that's what I'm talking about. We talk about, I think Live Oak Boulevard's a great spot to start out with, but that's not the answer. That's 40 beds. We have 760. 760, and we talk about mental health and mental illnesses and so forth, and they're going to need help to get through that. But we have to figure something out sooner than later. Whether it be, we talk about a tent city, we talk about they don't want it on the 2nd Street, and me personally, I've seen what they do down in Modesto, and I'm all about a tent city if in the right spot. Where's the right spot? Who's to say this is the best spot? But we're not going to, I don't believe personally 760 on Live Oak Boulevard, it's not going to happen. So let's start figuring out that we got to start talking about that there.
So, Supervisor, the current state of the law is that you have to have a place for someone to rest before you can relocate them. We are continuing to work with CRLA and continue to have those discussions. So as we have places for people to go, we can begin to enforce our no camping or our no parking ordinances of course, as the sheriff and Yuba City Police Department see fit. We do have more resources, though, than just the Live Oak facility that we're getting ready to put together. There are other programs available, and I think the point in time count, I think the number you're using is for both counties. And so there are facilities in Yuba County that have beds as well there. There are some facilities there, and they are developing more as well. So though I don't think we're going to be able to do, sort of a mass cleanup enforcement, I don't think we'll have that many beds. But I do think as we bring our programs forward, we will be able to start to do some very concerted efforts to clean up places like 2nd Street.
Well, I thought that's what tonight was all about, to talk about it. And we've been here for 1 hour and 3 minutes, so let's start talking about solutions. And we talked about it for 4 hours at the last meeting. And let's throw out the ideas. If you have them, throw it out. Let's start talking about them. We got one of the smartest guys around that knows what.
Trying to
it's
finish
got
up
the
with the
background.
presentation. Let him finish up with his presentations, and then we can get to the solutions.
And I think this is actually my last slide.
Just keep asking questions.
We actually did have something briefly to share regarding the New Haven Court project. So, and actually, if Gus, if you can make your way this direction. So just very briefly, just a very quick picture of the rendering of the New Haven Court project. And just as a reminder, we're talking about 40 units of permanent supportive housing at Garden Highway, Miles Avenue, and then Gus will very briefly give us a 2-minute update on the project.
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As you know, we submitted our last piece of finding application on the 1st of July. There's many levels of review that the Tax Credit Allocation Committee goes through. Final awards will be announced officially on September 25th. We've cleared the first couple levels of review, and we're pretty happy about that. The first one was the self-scoring review. So if you're on the outside looking in, then that's not really good. But if you're on the threshold of funding, and we were, so that was the first hurdle that we cleared. The second hurdle that we cleared was called a point score review. And what happens there is you either get a concurrence letter to your self-score, or based on this initial review, they do a downward adjustment of your score. We did get a microscopic downward adjustment, but it was not bad enough to reshuffle. We are still at the top of the list in the capital region. So those are the first two hurdles that we've cleared, and we're sitting in good shape. The next couple of reviews are a project eligibility review and a the feasibility review. So, and that's why it takes so long from application date to awards announced. So we'll keep you and your staff posted. But at this point, it's about the only update that we have at this time. Happy to answer any questions.
Got one here.
Through the mayor.
At least two.
Three.
Three.
So we spoke yesterday, but could you go over a timeline potential for this project?
Definitely, Mr. Chair. If September 25 goes in our favor, when awards are announced, we're put on a 180-day clock to close our construction financing and all of our agreements with our investor. So that puts us into mid-March. Yeah, 180 days, about mid-March. And we would be pulling building permits immediately following the closing of the construction financing. So starting construction late March, early April, weather permitting, 12 to 14 months of construction. Putting completion of the project in March, April of 2021.
To the mayor.
We got two in front of you, Ron.
Oh, excuse me.
That's okay.
Just a question, through the mayor, a question. How many applicants are still left in the process, including yourselves?
Good question. So in Yuba City, that competes in a region called the Capital Region, I believe they received a total of 6 applications. And our project scored the highest of the 6, and that's thanks to the decisions that both of these boards have made. So you can thank yourself for those really good decisions and that I begged and pleaded up here basically for. But yeah, so 6 applications. The Yuba City deal scored the highest. Even with that downward adjustment that we got on our score, we were still we still maintained first place. So.
Yes.
And just for the benefit of the public, those 6 applications are it was Yuba City, I think Folsom, West Sac, 2 in Sac, and I think maybe 1 in Rancho Cordova, I believe.
Follow-up question.
Do they release the requests for funding and how much is available, so you know if there's 1 available or 3 available?
Yes, very good question. So in each round, they'll tell you how much credit is available, and then depending on how much credit each application is applying for, they can fund all of them if there's enough credit. So it looks like in this round, there's enough credit to fund potentially 2 projects. Right.
Thank you.
Yes.
And congrats so far.
Thank you so far.
Gus.
Yes.
Have you ever reached this level before?
Not on this particular project, no. In other projects in our region, yes, but not Yuba City's project, no.
And how long has this process from to this point, reverse? How long has it been to get there?
Years. We had a different target population when we first tried to finance this deal many years ago. We were targeting just senior housing, just elderly 62 and over, and we just kept striking out. The project was not competitive enough in this region that I speak about. And so once we switched the target population to homeless, based on the community need and the funding available that the county had, it made the project more competitive. But even then, this is our second time at tax credit financing. So a couple times when we were targeting a senior project, and then this is the second time targeting this specific target population of homeless.
And where's this grant going through? Which state agency?
The Tax Credit Allocation Committee. It's through the State Treasurer's Office.
Which people wouldn't find. That's kind of strange because you think of homeless issues through the state treasurer's office.
Yeah, and the actual funding is an IRS program, to be honest. Yeah,
it is an IRS.
Yeah. It's a federal IRS program administered by the state of California's treasurer's office.
And it really is a public-private type of
Correct.
investment.
Correct. So if we're awarded the tax credits, then we need to find an investor to buy those tax credits from us.
And we have the investor?
We have a few that are very interested, yes.
Well done. I
Thank you.
applaud your work and your
so far.
team. Well, let's just call the secretary treasurer and tell her it's done. Thank you.
Thank you.
If only it was that easy.
Mr. Becerra,
Yes, sir.
Just for review, how many units are we talking about here again? And my question is, what is the target group that you plan on housing in this facility that we're assuming that you get the funding? How many units and the group that we're targeting to occupy those units?
Certainly, 40 units with a mix of studios, one bedrooms, and some two bedrooms sprinkled in there. Target population is two types. One is the general homeless, and the second is homeless with a mental disability receiving services through our local behavioral health department. So that is the general funding target. Then there's preferences. So veterans, of course, have a very high preference, and then residents of Sutter and Yuba counties have a higher preference than any other applicant. So that's the focus of the target population.
Thank you.
We're all good? All right. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
sir.
Appreciate it. All right. All right, so now we'll move on to, that's some good background. We'll move on to discussion for potential solutions, but first I'd like to ask, requesters may have public comment or anything before we move on. Is there anybody who would like to comment on what has already been said in these presentations? Someone say yes? Yeah, go ahead. Dave? Yeah.
Thanks. I'm David Holy Cross. I got a commercial property on Bridge Street. Maybe it's simple, but how does an individual become eligible to live in these type of houses? Or do they go to Hands of Hope? Or if I see a guy, I see a lot of them on my property, I tell them to, where do I refer them to?
Coordinated entry.
What is that?
I believe that is Hands of Hope. Hands of Hope.
Okay.
The mayor.
That's the stop. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, through the mayor.
Really applaud you guys for your efforts. Good job.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Dave.
David, you can also speak to Rick over here, Hands of Hope. Chelsea also works coordinated entry, as Marcia was stating. And maybe we should have a little workshop on that process in the future.
Hi, Steve Albrecht. And I just want to follow up on Supervisor Ziegenmeyer's comment about tent cities and questioning the, how much money is going to so few beds. 15 million with 200 or 220 beds. Okay, what is that? $68,000 or $70,000 per bed. Okay, the normal person is thinking, what? I mean, that's like, here's a problem. Little Johnny needs a ride to school. Okay. Actual real world solution. Bobby's mom and Sammy, Bobby's mom lives around the corner, and they swing by his house every day, so they'll pick him up. Not a problem. Okay, that's a real world solution. Government solution, and also a solution mandated by the courts. Provide little Johnny with, buy him a limo with a board certified driver. Okay, that's kind of like the analogy. It makes no sense. And I'm seeing all this money being spent in, of course, legal ways, and it can be justified, but here's the question. Is it going into the right pockets? Are the homeless actually being serviced by these dollars? To do the Woodland Project, it takes government time, that's money. It takes planning, consultants, attorneys, construction workers, and all that. So you have a lot of people involved who are receiving the homeless money, but do the homeless really, are they being serviced? Well, 200 are at a time. but hundreds or thousands of those other people who aren't involved, who aren't homeless, who are involved in other trades, are being serviced as well by that 15 million. So that is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. The homeless industrial complex, you could say, that all this money is going into the wrong pockets. Thank you.
If anybody would like to speak after this lady does, please queue up behind her to save some time.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegenmeyer, for your previous comments. I'd like to follow up. My name is Kate Mackinson. I'm at 365 2nd Street. Mr. Ziegenmeyer, you brought up the question if there are places for the homeless to live, or we have an alternative, and Mr. Whitaker addressed it too. Are the laws going to be able to be enforced on the camping? I was down 2nd Street all the way to the end today with my husband. And there are people that are parked there with a car nicer than I own and an RV. I don't understand how that person cannot be paying for an RV spot in some lot. That's my concern. I look at those and I think, you've just chosen to opt out of society and I have to pay your bill? I'd like to see that addressed. I don't know why that, if it is as stated that if we have an alternate facility to place these people, will those laws be enforced? That's my concern. That's what workshop I would like to have. Also, it's my experience, and I don't want to pick on lawyers specifically, but they give kind of squishy answers because they don't want to use specific language that can be, oh, well, you said that. I live on one of those homes in 2nd Street where the property, let me see if I can say this correctly. When the levee was permitted to be built in this county, it says that the levee district will forever maintain a fence behind those homes. My property goes all the way to a river. But forever is not squishy language. And I would like to, say, for my part, and I think many people in this county, or excuse me, this city at least, if you're worried about being sued because you don't have that alternate, I'll bet you taxpayers in this county in particular would say, hell yeah, make that fight. I could be wrong. I'm right there though, because I think it's a cultural aspect that's, since when has been defecating wherever you want to okay? I can't do that wherever I want to. And I think that those things need to be talked about. It's a cultural slide in what we expect of people anymore. And oh, it's okay to do your own thing. Well, I'm sorry, it's not. Mr. Albrecht and Mrs. Albrecht have people defecate in their yards. And nobody's holding these people without a home to a standard. Yes, we are offering alternate places, but again, it's Tent City down our street. And, like I said, there's people out there with an RV and a car right next to it that's nicer than mine. That's what I'd like to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Janice Shannon again. Before I start, one of the things that we don't address in this is vehicles. A lot of people live in their cars, not tents. There are no place for them to go. You mentioned, why aren't they in a park? Well, I don't know that there's a lot of parks that have available spaces for these people to go and park their vehicle or their RV or whatever it is. Sometimes because housing is so expensive, an RV payment is less expensive than a house or an apartment or something like that. So this goes back to the myriad of examples and things that we need to address. A camping spot, a campground that had bathrooms, that had showers, that had a laundry, and hookups for, whatever, would be a real asset if you can find a place to put it. And it would also allow us to say, we have a place for you to camp. If this is your choice in lifestyles, not the ones that have the vehicles, but the ones that want to live in a tent. If this is your chosen lifestyle, we have a place for you to go. If you don't go there, then you can enforce. But we have to have that alternative, and there are people that have chosen that lifestyle, and that's never going to change. We've had hobos since the dawn of time, so one of the things that we need to talk about is NIMBYism. There is no place in this community where anybody wants the homeless to be, or affordable housing. And when you say affordable housing, that doesn't necessarily mean the derelict society. These are people that may not have a job, that need to get a leg up, or maybe disabled, or any other, we have vets and seniors and families and unemployed and mentally ill and youth that have come out of the foster system, and disabled and single people, and there's just a whole gamut of people that we need to serve. We need to include our community in a way that they're participating in this process, not just coming and saying, we don't want it here, we don't want it here. I mean, the best neighbors I ever had lived behind me, and they were a halfway house for guys getting out of prison. They were the best neighbors ever, loved them. Without housing, no matter what process and what program we put these people through, when their time is up, they're going to go back into homelessness unless we provide the housing. We need to talk to developers. I know a developer that would be delighted to come. Okay, I'll wrap it up. That would be delighted and has volunteered to come and talk to both council and the county, and I've offered before. So if you would like to have a developer, private developer that works in rehab and new construction, affordable housing, tax credits, all of that, let me know. And my time's up.
I'm sorry. I understand her position. I own rentals. I don't charge the high rent that most people charge. But dozens of times I've been asked by Southern California buyers to sell my rentals. And I know people, a woman called me a couple of years ago crying. She paid $600 a month to rent a small one-bedroom apartment. It was bought by LA, and it moved to $1,100 a month. She became homeless. This stuff is wrong. We have way too much that doesn't allow people like me to gain in any way by having lower buildings. I checked on what it would cost me to build a house on a lot right here in Yuba City. I was flabbergasted. We need to find ways that people can build houses that are not these great big mansions so that we can help people. And yes, 2 of the houses I own, 3-bedroom, 1 bath. But the people are happy as can be to have them, and I don't charge high rent. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, so we'll bring it back to the panel for any comments. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, we have one. If anybody else would like to speak after this speaker, please queue up behind, so I will know not to skip you.
Hi, I'm Morgan Dussault, and I just wanted to touch on a couple points when you're talking about solutions. I think that's a conversation I'd really love to have, and we can even have a side conversation on that too. When I used to work with Habitat for Humanity, one of the things I contemplated thinking, how can we build more affordably and build permanent, a permanent solution? Because what are we trying to accomplish here? We're just trying to ensure enforcement and an enforcement initiative. Do we really want to end homelessness? Because if we want to end homelessness, we have to think about this very dynamically. Sheltering is not the only solution. RHA projects are not the only solution. We have to increase the housing inventory across the board. So one of the projects I thought of was we can partner with Tough Sheds. They'll give us a discount on a bulk pricing. You can have them custom design a structure that's prefab that sits on a permanent foundation, 500, 600 square feet with AC, plumbing, everything for under $15,000. Now that makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of trailer parks and such that are blight issues that we could, take those, put tiny homes, make a tiny home development. I know the infrastructure is probably the most costly portion of this, but you can even create a home ownership opportunity out of this for probably about $150 a month at low or no interest. So that's one solution. The other option, we have a hospital sitting vacant. There is a lot of funding. There's also a new opportunity for funding. It's through AHSC. Now, typically, the AHSC cap and trade funding for affordable housing has been allocated to urban and metropolitan areas, but there is a grant writer that her firm has successfully secured it for 2 rural locations in Northern California. We did meet with her as Habitat for Humanity a couple months ago and brought together key stakeholders, and it seems like it's a viable opportunity. They secured $16 million in the first round and $16 million in the second round for Reading, back to back. And then, it's up to $20 million. You can apply $20 million. You can apply for 2 rounds back to back. And you can leverage it with federal dollars. So a lot of these times you have to leverage with local dollars for these grant opportunities, but this one you can leverage against state funding with federal. So those are just some options. I mean, there are definitely a lot of solutions, but I think we're really on the right path. But people want to move out of homelessness. The people we work with in coordinated entry day in and day out, they want to move out of homelessness, but we can't even begin to move people out of homelessness to address the ones that are still homeless until we have permanent housing for individuals to go into. And what we do know is that only a very small portion of our homeless population wants to live off the grid. Very, very small. But that's all I have to say. So thank you guys. I applaud your efforts. I think this is a great forum. I think we need to keep having these and continue to just engage with our community. So,
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Jerry Handy. Is there any way we can put the Woodland projects up there one more time?
I'm sure we can.
Do it. So, again, thank you all for putting this together. This is amazing. When I saw that slide come up, it got me jazzed up. It got me excited. I'm a construction guy. I work for developers, do multifamily housing. I've been doing a lot of research over the last month about these types of projects specifically all over the United States. There's a model that we should all look at. It's in Austin, Texas, or right outside there. It has these types of structures. It has the RVs. It has the tents. It has a community involved. So it's not just structures, right? Structures isn't the issue. Shelters isn't the only issue. It's community. It's family. It's support. It's programming. This kind of structure starts to represent that, right? I would ask as a solution, as you guys are starting to talk about this, is that you guys relook at what was proposed, I think maybe last year, which was the site at Glad Tidings Church. They have property out there. They want to partner with the city, the county, other nonprofit organizations to put up this exact thing on their property. It's been a year ago that this was proposed. We could have had this right now.
Through the
if it
chair.
was accepted.
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but that facility was already looked at by the ad hoc committee, and the recommendation came to the board of supervisors, and citizens came out and spoke up against putting a facility out there at Glad Tidings, and so that was not approved at that time.
Yeah, no, I
just want to let
understand.
you know.
Yeah, I think I'd heard that it was presented. I'd heard that there was maybe some false information that came out of some meetings. That's hearsay. I wasn't there. I've lived here my whole life, 43 years old, born and raised in Marysville, Yuba City. I know a lot about the community, been involved in the community, been involved with many nonprofit organizations, been involved in many churches. Glad Tidings Church, they have a heart for homeless people. They have a heart to help this community. I would suggest that this community partners, if it's not them, some other group to do this. This is a great concept. So anyways, I got to go pick the kids up from football. See you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, so you know, queued behind Jerry. We will move on to commentary from the panel.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Through the mayor. I'm sorry. I'm just saying through the chair. I will tell you that this has been a long process. I mean, from the board's perspective, we've dealt with this issue for quite some time, and I'm sure the city council can echo some of the same sentiments. I'll give you an example. For Supervisor Flores and I took a conference trip to Washington, D.C., and on that conference trip, we visited the National Institute of Homelessness. Supervisor Flores asked a question, give us a model that we can take back to our community that actually works. Their response was, there is no model that actually works. We have no model currently. I mean, if the National Institute of Homelessness in Washington, D.C. didn't have a model, that shocked me. I was flabbergasted. Sutter County has, in the evacuation, we put up several homeless individuals for 2 weeks, and then moving some of those individuals into transitional housing. We received a environmental cleanup bill for $250,000 when we had the high waters, because all that trash and debris that the homeless people were living on by 2nd Street ended up down the river. So we incurred that cost. We partnered with Sutter County Consolidated Housing Authority, which Gus Becerra already spoke about. And I really appreciate, Gus, all your hard work on that project, on the New Haven project with 40 beds. And people will sit there and saying, man, the cost of doing that, high costs for each one of those units is, what's the average cost for those units?
$350,000.
300, yeah, per unit. So, and people, and that's what we're paying. We're partnered with obviously Yuba County as well. We put together an ad hoc committee after we were told that Whitaker Hall was not a viable option, and several citizens came out and spoke up against putting Whitaker Hall as a homeless shelter. And we heard from everyone from the sheriff posse to the airport to Little League parents and the Rod and Gun Club that they didn't want that to happen. And so we listened to them and said, okay, we'll put together an ad hoc committee and find an alternative site. And I'll tell you right now, hats off to Janice Shannon, who got up and spoke, who chaired that committee, and all the other committee members that gave their volunteerism and their time and talents to try to find an alternative site. And she's right. Where in this county can you put a homeless shelter that people aren't going to say, no, not here, not in my backyard? We get that everywhere. Anytime we find a potential site, citizens will always come out and say, no, that's 2 miles away from a school, or there's a daycare over there, you can't put them over there. So, I think the solution, we're looking at different solutions. We have to look at partnering with the city of Yuba City and possibly putting up another ad hoc committee to find another site that's a viable site for that will meet all of our needs. The county has found the site of Live Oak Boulevard. Where we put that next site, I think that has to be a joint ad hoc committee with the city of Yuba City and Sutter County, And obviously, you know, I think when we partner together, I think we're strength in numbers, and we can also you know, collaborate and consolidate some of our resources, and as well as looking at possible funding, other funding. Well, right now, it's just a tennis game. It seems, just, for me personally, it's a tennis game, and we're pushing people to Yuba County, to Marysville, and they're pushing them back to over across that bridge. It's a human tennis game that we're playing with these individuals, and so we have to address this homeless situation in a regional basis with our other jurisdictions, as Yuba County and Marysville and the city of Yuba City and Sutter County, of how we're going to address this whole homeless problem within our region. You know, I think each and every one of us, you know, has compassion and you know, has the mindset of you don't mind giving somebody a hand up. It's just continually giving handouts all the time, over and over. It's like, so we're not really addressing the situation, and you know, we can no longer put our heads in the sand and say, hey, this problem's going to go away. It's not going to go away. You know, we have some serious mental health issues that are going on out there with homeless population, and you know, hats off to Sheriff Barnes, who's always looking for you know, potential solutions as well. You can't sit there and blame the sheriff and say, you know, why isn't he enforcing that? Why isn't he enforcing this ordinance? Well, he can't. That's the bottom line. He can't. And so it's up to all of us as a community to find those solutions and work with our prospective elected officials and get things done. All right. Thank you.
Through the mayor. I agree with Supervisor Whitaker's comments. Mine are going to be brief. I am encouraged by the level of regional cooperation that this county and the city have taken on in regards to this, and the public. I think I can't remember who it was who said this, but it is going to take a public-private partnership to begin to attack this problem, and I know that those efforts are already underway. As it relates to where to site things, Ms. Shannon hit the nail on the head. No matter where we put something, we're going to have resistance, and we're going to make people upset. And I recognize that and I acknowledge that, but at the same time, we have to do something. You know, I just mentioned this before. Walking neighborhoods as a potential candidate, homelessness and the infiltration of the neighborhoods was right up there with all the problems that people spoke about. And as an elected official, for the city of Yuba City anyway, my goal is to make sure that we take advantage and have our staff take advantage of any of the funding opportunities, and Mr. Thurman spoke of them. There's a lot of stuff coming from the state. We need to leverage that at the highest level and make that a top priority. As far as solutions, again, Supervisor Whitaker, you go back to the folks that are doing this on a full-time basis, they can't produce one. The best we can do is try to do one ourselves here, and I think that we're going to try to do that, and we owe our public to try to do that. As far as Mark Boomgarden coming forward with a solution, I'm going to be honest, I don't have one right now. I think Mr. Smith called it better way. You know, that seems viable right now. I know that's going to make some in the audience and some in the north part of the city unhappy. I get that. But I don't know of another alternative at this particular point in time. And unless someone can come up with a better solution, I'll go back to my previous comment. No matter where we put it, we're going to have resistance. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. Everybody had great comments, great concerns, great ideas, and we just need to work on those more between the city and the county, and I think we're moving that direction. I'd like to thank Janet Shannon for your comments. They were spot on a lot of issues. Not all the homeless will take advantage of these services and these ideas, that we have to get them the help they need. And when they don't, I don't know what we're going to do with them at that point, but we'll have to provide some kind of a place for them to go. And I just think that there are going to be some that will not want to do that. Maybe they'll move on. I mean, leave Sutter County, Yuba County. I don't know the answer to that. But that is one concern I have, is they won't take advantage of the services. And I think that the new site on Live Oak Boulevard, you know, that the committee recommended, is a great site, because those people all need no, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of the homeless that are homeless need those services. They need job training skills. They need job skills. They need mental health help. They need alcohol and drug abuse treatment. They provide all those services there. That's why that's the best site in my mind. But we've got to find a solution, and I want to find more affordable housing in this county. We don't have nearly adequate affordable housing, and I don't think 40 units, I don't think 100 units is going to solve that problem. Thank you.
To the mayor. No, let her go ahead. Ladies before.
My awareness about homelessness, it really is an emotional, it is really messy, it is very complicated. It's an issue that we all feel in different ways, and it's experienced very differently across the country. There is no model, as you said, because every community has its own personality, its own way, and how it handles things. So I believe that in the city and in the county, both communities, we truly need to have some principles of what we believe in. And one of the principles that I believe in is taking care of those that need to be taken care of, but using the right resources into helping. I like the name Better Way. Reminds me of Amway. Is needed. It really truly is needed. It's an emergency shelter. We often go back and default to the laws. How do we penalize them? How do we lock them up? How do we hide them? How do we put them away? Well, there's these things that's called dignity, humanity, and then there's laws. So sometimes we're strapped with that we have to follow the rules. We have to follow the laws. Therefore, when we put a shelter, it starts allowing us to utilize some of these laws that some folks are interested in seeing more of that from both of our communities. I'm on the Yuba City Homeless Consortium. I'm one of the founding members. And to be on that consortium has been a privilege and an honor. To see where we began to where we're at now, I enjoy the process. It's complicated and messy, like I said, but we are making tremendous strides. Part of what's happened in the last 3 years, the Bi-County Homeless Services Program, which is a Yuba City leadership type committee, has been meeting. And from that, the Yuba City Regional Planning Committee on Homelessness has also been meeting. The Yuba City Homeless Consortium, we've been doing this for almost 13 years. And part of that, we developed the Yuba City Coordinated Entry Project, which is Hands of Hope and the Life Building in both communities, one in Marysville, one in Yuba City. And I'll take the privilege and the pride to say that I was on the selecting and hiring committee that hired Scott Thurman. Why? Because we needed to leverage our resources. We needed to have someone that can pull all of this together. And from there on, Scott's working for many of us, not just for the consortium. I just gave you a plug. Anyhow, I have experienced and been part of many solutions that are totally in the progress flow right now. And I'm going to cover two solutions that I think are really critical. And listening to the community it is always my primary job, to listen to you, to hear you out. And in the end, know that I'm going to make that right decision for all of us in the community. The first thing that I think is really working well, and some of you have already mentioned, is the regional coordination. Completely important. We leverage our strengths and resources of each county to more effectively serve individuals experiencing homelessness. When we're leveraging, this includes funds, monies, this includes policies, this includes law enforcement issues, this includes social services, this includes capital, this includes revitalization, and this includes a strategic plan, a 5-year strategic plan that many have contributed to this plan that is a regional bi-county plan. Is it a perfect one? No, but it's working. It's getting us there. I hope all of you read it. It's a really good one. So my second solution is that I strongly encourage my fellow gentlemen up here, including our executive team, and they've been doing a really awesome job, and staff, to engage, support, and work collectively. We are working towards that. There's room for improvement. Working with local or out-of-state other places, like others mentioned, private businesses, community-based organizations, and with our community members. The community-based organizations that are truly engaged in the groundwork is the Salvation Army, Hands of Hope, Casa Esperanza, REST, just to name a few. Though they are in the groundwork level. If you haven't visited those sites and you haven't had the opportunity to sit down with those directors or people that are doing the work, I encourage you to go there, to sit down, experience it, and be there. And the elephant in the room to say is not an elephant no longer. We lack affordable housing options. This vision that is being proposed is an excellent vision. We also need affordable housing options. There's a substantial lack of housing available for families with low income. Preventing homelessness should be our first priority. And in that, expanding temporary housing would be, as others have mentioned, working with investors and developers to look for building affordable housing. And I say to you, when the Fed said to you that there is no model, there is a model right there. Yuba Sutter County is a model. We are ahead of other communities, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen. And I say to you that it is possible for us to experience and do something great in this community. And in those two solutions, I go back to the regional coordination. It really works. And the second is encouraging my fellow elected folks here to really engage, support, and all of us to work collectively. It has to be private, public, community, all of us doing it together. It cannot be just resting on the public's hands to take care of it all. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
I think it would be fair to say that our community is reaching, if they have not already, a little something that I call compassion fatigue. And we need to approach this obviously with intelligence. Part of my problem is I think that I look at Sutter County and our area, our community, not just Sutter County, Yuba City and Sutter County, with an abscessed tooth, and so far 40 beds, 40 people staying in back of mental health on Live Oak Boulevard is like taking a baby aspirin for an impacted wisdom tooth. We need a root canal, and I understand that, and I agree with Councilwoman Espindola that yes, we do need to coordinate our efforts together. But what do we do in the interim? Do we hurry up and wait for all of this? I mean, we're talking about months, years. I think that we need to do something that at least provides, I mean, it's all trial and error at this point, so why don't we do something more so than just some tough sheds on Live Oak Boulevard? We need to make some sort of an impact on the community that at least shows we're trying and erring maybe, but at least we're trying to deal with the issue. I think that sometimes we make it far too easy to remain homeless by providing meals and clothes and services on the sides of the road or in the river bottoms. And I'd like to think that we should help those people who want it, and certainly not coddle those who don't want the help, but yet they want to live free off the public. And that's a lot of what we see that I think leads to this frustration that a lot of us are feeling at this point in time. My problem with all of these wonderful solutions is, what do we do in the interim? Do we hurry up and wait for years for the 40-unit project to happen? Do we hurry up and wait for federal funding, or do we help maybe 40 people at back of Live Oak Boulevard? I'm inclined to agree with Supervisor Ziegemeier that there needs to be something, at least temporarily, be it a tent city or be it some alternative that is trial and error, not a permanent solution, because I'm not sure anybody has one of those. But we need to do something that at least shows we're trying, other than talking, about doing or solving at least some of the problem. If that means a temporary tent city somewhere, so be it. I don't know why we think we need to provide something better than what folks currently have. I've heard talk that the tough sheds, someone says, well, we're going to air condition them. Really? I know people that can't hardly pay their PG&E bill in the summertime, and we're going to air condition tough sheds for a lot of these folks that have fallen upon hard times. I'm just saying that in the interim, while we hurry up and wait for all of these wonderful funding opportunities and good things to happen, I think we need to do something, at least on a temporary. Let's try it and see if it works. If it doesn't work, what's the worst thing that can happen to us? It can't be any worse than it is now. We have a bunch of folks running around town that are going through every recyclable opportunity that they see. They'll do that all day, all night, but yet none of them really want any rules to live by. So I think that we need to begin looking toward our Live Oak Boulevard opportunity, but also other things, maybe a tent city somewhere, maybe so that the law enforcement people can enforce a no parking ordinance, if not a no camping ordinance. Something that needs to happen more so immediately than the hurry up and wait and, well, when is it going to happen? And I don't think anybody has an answer for that. So I'm suggesting that we at least begin to try to do something, right or wrong. Hopefully it's right, as a temporary solution to a problem that we all see, but we want to keep talking about it, not doing anything about it.
Through the mayor, I'm going to toss out my thoughts here tonight, and I'll be pretty direct and try to be brief. Backtrack to the last workshop we've had, because it may seem like I'm tough on the homeless, but I have direct effects of family members being homeless. I'm not going to go down that avenue again. I did that the last meeting. So it's not a lack of compassion. I probably understand homelessness because it affected one of my daughters more than a lot of you guys sitting in the room, because it was my daughter and it was a path she chose. But in short, the answer is yes. We've got to do a lot. We are sitting here today and we're trying to play the same game of baseball or the same game of football, and what's happened is they changed the rules on us. And we're trying to play the same game and the same rules don't work. So when I say the answer is yes, we've got to tackle this from a multifaceted point. Building, better way is just one step. We need to look at a lot of the small projects. They talked earlier about getting 100% funding if the right partnership is there for, I believe it was less than 20 is what we talked about, that if we applied for that, we could get 100% funding. We need to look at all the different avenues that we can do this because, in short, we have to take back our city. And that's what I'm hearing time and time again. I don't see the homeless people here tonight going, we want to remain homeless. I see the tax-paying citizens here saying, we want our city back. We want our county back. I'm like you. I've confronted homeless out in front of my house at 2 a.m. doing exactly what you talked about earlier, the lady over here. Going into the cul-de-sac, throwing the cans into the middle of the cul-de-sac and leaving crap everywhere. And then I went out and confronted them, ran them off. I shouldn't have to do that. Neither should you. We should not have the homeless coming through yards and on the doorsteps of businesses defecating. I mean, it's atrocious what's happening. And I get that there's mental illness and everything else. We have to not give them a hand out that empowers them to continue the lifestyle they have. We need to give them a hand up and use every tool that we have to get them out of that. One of the key elements that we're missing is how do we empower the men and women that wear these uniforms to do the job that every one of you right here tonight has said you want them to do. And please, it's just, I appreciate it, but I don't want to grandstand. This is the real problem that we have here, is the men and women that wear the badge can't do the job because of the laws that have been passed that tie their hands. The simplest way to get there, and I'll say it, if you felt earlier that the attorneys was giving you squishy answers, is what I heard. It's real simple. You have to have a bed for the count of homeless. So how do we leverage all of these free programs, a lot of 14 forwards, a lot of, even building into this project here? How do we get to a point to where we have a place for them? Because once we have a place for them, then our law enforcement can begin to enforce the laws that are there. So what we have to do is work together. And I want to commend everyone at this podium or this dais up here, because honestly, this wouldn't have happened a year or two ago. The county and the city is working very well together, and I appreciate every one of my brothers and sisters up here to try to find solutions, because a couple years ago this would not have happened. So thank you guys. We listen to each other, but we've got to hit every approach there is. We've got to look at projects that the one that's up here now, 15 million, I believe you said, and it takes care of 229 people versus what you were asking earlier. And it's a good project, but New Haven takes care of 40 people, and it's $330,000 a door. That was 68. We got to start being more prudent with our money. When I talk about the game has changed, they've been working on this for multiple years. I believe the last count that Gus gave me was over 5 when it goes back in its history. But the game's changed. And so we've got to start looking at how can we accomplish things, because the real root of what we've got to do is get these homeless people help, but more importantly, give these men and women in the uniform the support and help they need so they can help you and us. That's the real key. The number of beds to the head count. We're not going to do it building some massive structure to house 800 people. But we've got to go up and down the county and up and down the city and find locations. And no place is going to be perfect. We have to start partnering with people like Casa de Esperanza. We're doing the one, and thank you guys at the county for getting that guy rebuilt. Kudos to you there. But it needs to be bigger. We need to look at, can we do more for CASA? Can we do more for Salvation Army? Hands of Hope. Mr. Handy talked earlier. I wasn't a part of everything, but, hey, if a church, if Glad Tidings or Calvary or any of them around here are willing to do something, let's look at it. Let's put everything on the table to solve the problem. Because at the end of the day, we have to get these people an avenue to get off the streets, out of the river bottoms, so that we can take back our city. That is really the skinny of what we need to do, gentlemen and ladies. is figure out that path. You wanted solutions? I don't have the magic wand, but I see the path and it seems to be very clear. Get the number of beds, empower our law enforcement to help us take back our city. Then we can get growth. We need housing, absolutely. We need not only low-income housing and affordable housing, but we need higher-end housing too. What happened up in Paradise, the tragedy with the campfire? Adventist Health moved a lot of their physicians and stuff down into our area. They're having a hard time finding housing. They're not looking for a 1,200 square foot, $150,000 home. Sad part is we don't have a home for them either. We have to approach this at all facets. We have to make sure that every option is on the table and we're not truncating ourselves into one idea. But if you really want to get this fixed, it's in all of us working together, partnering with private sector, and going after all options, not just one. Because there's a lot of things that needs to happen. And I see Mr. Flo back there. You guys over at Mental Health, John, you guys do a bang-up job. And I tell you, continue working it. And if we can get them into facilities and get them in contact with you guys, we can start working on this more and more. It's a very slow process, but it starts with getting them a place to be. And I want to thank everybody. Grace, what you guys have done over the years is commendable. Nothing wrong about that. But what we're faced with is the rule makers have changed the game on us. So now we've got to outthink them, and we've got to play by their rules to get the funding, to get them off the street so that these men and women can do their job to stop the stuff that's going on in your neighborhood and your neighborhood. So that's my thoughts.
Through the mayor. Okay, so Scott, you heard what he said. So half the bill is going to go to Yuba City. All right. So this is what I would like to look into. Scott, I'm glad you're walking over. I'm glad you're walking over there, Scott, because I want to hear. First of all, I want to say some things, and then I want to ask you what your thoughts are on a possible solution. Because I'm sure, every one of us right here, that's not all the solution right there. Every one of us here, trust me, as supervisors and council members, this is all we've been thinking about. All right? You flip on any Facebook, it's right there. We think about this regardless, because there's a problem, and we have to figure out this problem. So, ad hoc committee. Let's talk about getting the ad hoc committee. Let's have county council look into FAA, see if that's even possible, doing anything over there. I thought we already looked into that. Let's talk to have the ad hoc committee talk to Glad Tidings. Let's have the ad hoc committee talk to the neighbors around Glad Tidings. Maybe if they sit down and discuss, like Jerry said, I wasn't part of any of this, and Jerry said maybe not all the right information got to the neighbors or so forth, but that's one step right there. We've also talked for the last 3 months about sending a letter to the state or the federal government about environmental issues with everything that's going on in the river bottoms. Let's send a joint letter from City Council and Sutter County supervisors to the state saying, hey, this is unacceptable. They're defecating right here and so forth on the levees. They're digging the holes. They're your levees. You need to take care of them. So that's another step. But the biggest solution here, the biggest problem here is what's one of your solutions, or I'm sure you've had to thought about this in the last couple months on a temporary housing.
I would even back up just a little bit, and I'll get to that particular answer. But I think in general, what has to happen at the beginning stages is there has to be some agreed upon principles as it relates to homelessness and addressing homelessness that everyone, the leadership, agrees upon, and that everyone that's at the staff level can function off of. And it has to be a principle that leads towards a defined solution. And I really believe that defined solution shouldn't be about whether you care about the homeless or not care about the homeless, but it just has to be a solution that is based on the needs of the homeless and the community. And I think that's a really foundational component. And one of the questions within that the elected officials may want to ask themselves is, what do you want the experience of homelessness to be like within Yuba City and Sutter County? And it has to be, that experience and that principle has to make sense to head towards a solution. And everyone has to keep their eye on that solution and almost give up our personal bents one way or the other and say, this is our solution. And even within that, establishing the date that you want that solution in place by. So I think that's a really foundational component.
Sorry, through the mayor still, but do you have any ideas of any locations?
Well, I think within that, as a principle, one of the questions I would ask is, what are your principles as far as locations? You know, what are the components as far as the selecting of locations? Because then at the staff and at the community level, everyone can work off of that principle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, this is what your office does. You've done this. I'm sure you've been to other counties and other cities where you guys, part of your whole deal is to find areas that you say, hey, we might recommend this or this area, or I mean, is there nothing, or we?
Well, it's if we were just making a solution on our own, we would select a location and say go with that. But there are generally many different factors related to that particular location. I don't know if it can be siloed to the point where Thurman Consulting is just saying select this location. We do have an idea. We have expressed an idea, but I think it has to be a general consensus with the elected officials that that there's a principle in there that we're operating off of that drives us towards a location that everyone agrees upon.
Through the mayor. So, Mr. Thurman, in your travels and dealing with a homeless issue, Ms. Shannon brought up a key component where obviously a lot of homeless people like to live in their cars. All right. So what do you do when you set up a place like Better Way, and you're going to have tough sheds out there? What do people do with their personal belongings, their cars, their trailers, their motorhomes? Where do those go?
Well, internally at the staff level, we've dialogued about some potential scenarios where individuals may be able to park their motorhomes, for example, at certain locations, and while they're at the shelter. But of course, they will not be able to park it at the shelter location. So we're beginning to finalize some of those components.
Do you ever see any, because based on the rules of the state of California, and Councilman Shaw, I don't think you're correct when you're talking about beds per homeless, because based on the California policy is I only have to give a place of rest, correct? I only have to provide a place of rest. I don't have to provide showers, bed, space, any of that stuff. Is that correct?
That's correct. But related to the whole principal issue, I would ask as a community, what do you want to have happen with that average homeless individual? Do you want them to just be located in an area, or do you want them to progress towards self-sufficiency and have a situation where there's a limited amount of recidivism related to homeless individuals? I think that's the principle that you want to dialogue about. You might decide as a jurisdiction or jurisdictions that you just want a place of rest and that's what you're going to operate off of. I don't know if that's in your best interest to just rest on that particular component.
I'm not, sir, and I'm not resting on that. I'm already committed to Live Oak Boulevard, but I'm looking at a potential site of saying, for those people that don't want to move out of the river bottoms and don't want to move out of Second Street, well, here's an alternative site that you can go to as you transition into those other units. Because I've already approved, a 40-bed site over on Garden Highway. I've already approved 40 spaces over on Live Oak Boulevard. So I'm looking for an alternative site that I can possibly put people that can go and move their trailers there until we can transition them into other spaces. A place where then I can say that to the sheriff that, hey, these people have an alternative site to go to, and so we can enforce that ordinance at that time.
And I hear what you're saying, and I would be in agreement in that the general principle that I see in every community that we work with is there's two populations. There's the homeless population that you have to manage, and there's the homeless population that is ready to head towards housing and self-sufficiency. And I think those are the two questions we have to answer here locally is, okay, what are we going to do with those individuals that are ready to go through the system and to get housing? And then what's going to take place with those that have to be managed? And I will give you an example. One of the jurisdictions we work with, they've gone back and forth related to a tent city concept. And it keeps coming on the table because they know they have a population that needs to be managed, and then they also have a population that needs to go through the system. So I think you're correct in that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Through the mayor, if I may follow up, sir. Supervisor Whitaker, the reference that I made to the beds came from county council at the last workshop because we were counting all of the number of beds in relation to a question. So we need to get clarification, whether it's beds or space, and then that needs to be crystal clear from council so that it empowers our law enforcement officers to be able to enforce this. I totally agree with you. If we only need to provide an area of rest, then let's count it and let's make sure we've got it. But we're driving for the same ends. So we need council to give clear and direct clarification as to what that law interpretation is.
And I'm pretty sure that council has already given that interpretation. So
At the last meeting, Supervisor, she was referring to counting beds. That's the reason I went there. So whatever the answer is, we just need to know it and for the record so we can address it.
Through the mayor, and this conversation, this dialogue is the perfect example why regional coordination is needed completely, because in a matter of minutes, we have a difference of principle of how we identify where a person can stay. Is it a bed or is it a rest? So that coordination that happens within ourselves, and it also happens within our executive team and staff, and the community will have a better understanding where we all are on the same page. And that ties back into policies, which helps the sheriff and the chief and all of our folks do a better job in the work that they're doing for us in the community. Now, Supervisor Solinger, you made a comment that the process is too slow, it's not working fast enough, and the numbers. So when I look at our point in time, and I have the data from 2017, and this is a bi-county, and Supervisor Ziegemeier mentioned this, we have 760, I believe, identified.
In both counties.
Correct, both counties, thank you. We don't know exactly how many are in Yuba City only. We don't know exactly how many are in Sutter County only. But we do know what we have in the region. Again, regional coordination needed. 150 of those 760 are the ones that I think you're speaking of, which is about 20% of the population. So 80% of that population is in some temporary need. Emergency shelter, transitional shelter, affordable housing. And that's why I went back to what I believe is a principle is preventing people from becoming homeless. So Elaine mentioned about the campfires and how people were displaced from their campfires and people not being able to find housing. So rent has gone up, and for some folks, right? And some people can't afford it. So are they the individuals that we're considering at the river bottoms? No. That could be your neighbor. That could be you. You never know. So I just want to remind us of the population that sometimes we go to easily is to this 20% of the population. And I get it. It is a challenging group of people. And they do horrible things. Correct. Thank you. But yet, the majority of the homeless people are families with kids, individuals, veterans, people that lost their job. Let's not forget who we're really dealing with here, people, and not just gravitate to the need of law enforcement, because I'm telling you, law enforcement wants to do their job, and they do a fantastic job. Truly, they do. And again, my second solution, I said earlier, and I think you're going with this, is about an ad hoc committee. I'll volunteer for that ad hoc committee, but we got to get the principles right, and we got to have a hard date, make that decision. What are we doing together? Otherwise, the coordination's not going to work, and we're going to be back exactly where we started 3 years ago.
To the chair. Just a point of clarification, and this is just our experience as a firm. There are no jurisdictions that have 100% bed coverage for their homeless population. Usually, I generally see somewhere around 40 to 50%. So I don't know if that's something that you can fully drive towards, to have 100% coverage at any point in time. But you want to have a functional number of beds that can move folks through a system. So just a point of clarification.
Thank you.
One quick question. Don't we have most of our families with already have housing? We don't have too many in the river bottoms that are homeless that don't have. We've gotten most of that taken care of, right?
So we have a fairly strong plan in place for families, and even as we're planning the shelter operations, we are not planning to have any families there, because we have a different pathway that can lead towards housing for families, and there's funding available for that. So we really are talking about singles for the most part.
The mayor. Yep. Gene, this is for you. We've been to quite a few meetings the last 3 years. Hopefully, it's a place to rest. So a rest would be considered a bed, correct? So we can get this nipped in the bud. That way we can move forward. It was a place to rest. So that would be a bed for them to be in, wasn't it?
Right. Sometimes those terms are used interchangeably, and I don't mean to be squishy, but there are a number of different courts that have weighed in on this decision, on this issue. We do anticipate in the next year we're going to hear from the Supreme Court on the constitutional issues surrounding this. Particularly in the Boise case. The Boise case is where this terminology "right to rest" came from. The Supreme Court is supposed to take this case, and we will get some more direction, which doesn't help us right now. There's cases all over, particularly California, where we've seen different courts give different results. For instance, Orange County and LA County, obviously they will never achieve bed for person. It'll never happen. And the courts have put injunctions and different restrictions around them until they came up to a certain level of beds. But there really is no bright line. There's not 75% of your point in time count, 50%. The cases are really all over the board on this. So Unfortunately, I can't give you a solid, this is the one answer, but I think all the things that we're doing are going to come together to allow law enforcement to start enforcement. And I think right now we have limited beds. So the best course of action, if we do some limited enforcement, which we have done, we make sure there is a bed available so that we can avoid another lawsuit by the advocacy groups that are expensive and time consuming, taking staff away from working on these projects that bring forward the solutions.
Thank you, Gene. I appreciate it.
To the mayor.
Sir.
I just have a point of clarification. One of the action items, which I totally agree with, in setting up the committee tonight, I think that was a very good suggestion. It was mentioned a few times tonight. Did you, just to clarify, did you suggest, or do you suggest that we do this with a citizens committee, or are we talking about combining jurisdiction leadership, or what's the idea?
Well, Supervisor Whitaker brought it up.
Right, so I brought it up to, as that we have already had, the county has already had an ad hoc committee, and that's, and I wish that we had time for Janice Shannon to come up and in detail tell us about how hard that was to come up with a viable space for a homeless shelter. But I think it, you know, in collaboration is that two supervisors, I see it as two supervisors, two city council members sitting on that, as well as having people from the public sit on that. And people from the public as far as like business leaders, Chamber of Commerce, and other people that can actively be involved in finding a potential site.
Great, thank you.
Nothing? I'm good? You did? All right, I concur that that would be a good idea. One of the many purposes that we've already discussed, but I want to go back to Scott's suggestion in that as we move forward, we're talking about a very, very complicated problem here. Many reasons for folks to get there, many reasons to solve their issue. But you have to have, or we have to come together and establish some guiding principles. We do that with our strategic plans. We do that with everything we do. And so those guardrails, if you will give them some direction as they come together. For example, what a site looks like, what homelessness will look like. I hope that in Yuba City how we want that to be, how we're going to play it out. I think we need to be careful in that some folks need services. The folks that want it and need it, we're all there about it. The folks that want it and don't need it, I got a problem with. The folks that don't need it because they're too lazy, I got a problem with. We can go all the way down the list, right? We don't want to be known as friendly, in my opinion, to homeless people, because that way we're going to have people out of the situation that interact more, and we're just going to backfill and create our own issues, right? So friendly might not be the right word. We want to be civil and respectful to them as human beings, but we don't want to just roll out the red carpet because we're offering service after service after service. We have a lot of organizations in our community that do a lot of good work for the folks. However, are we, in the bigger picture, are we contributing to the problem, or are we working at solving it? Perhaps we are solving their issue for 10 minutes until they're hungry again. But so that's something I'd like the ad hoc committee to address, is what are our guiding principles as we move forward? What are the parameters? What do we stand for as a community? Working together like we've already talked about, we're doing that exactly right now. We're sitting all up here together. We have the community here. I believe it's even being recorded so other folks to watch it, and that's a step in the right direction. Law enforcement is not the solution, but it is definitely part of it, definitely part of it. And I think I would recommend we make that one of our first priorities, is to do something, put something in place so our law enforcement folks can actually do their job that they want to do. I know they want to do it. We all want them to be able to, and it's not their fault. So we need to get some type of place, we call it a tent city, whatever the word may be. You have a place to go. You cannot park your RV on 2nd Street and put a fence around it, and one person even had the nerve to put up no trespassing sign. How do you explain that? But, so you guys know what I mean, right? And I took, Steve, you know, I went over to your house and you walked me over the levee. I showed you showed me firsthand what you're facing, and then that very night you sent me a video recording of somebody messing with your fence or breaking your fence. That I think of you too, and that's why I want to empower law enforcement sooner than later as one of our first next steps. We work on the bigger problem for sure when we have to do that, but you should not have to tolerate that. So many folks ask us, what about the property owner's rights? You have your rights. No one's taken away your rights. It's just that law enforcement, some of these lower end crimes, which are considered that, they have to be there to witness it in order to take any action, unless you want it, if the property owner wants to do it. It's a tough spot. Whether you're homeless or not, whoever's doing it, that's just the law. And so you have to realize that, right? We care about your rights. We care about your property rights. We really, really do, and we share your frustration. So I think right now, if we can get something in place to allow law enforcement to do what they want to do, that would be great. In fact, as part of our budget process in the city of Yuba City, we allocated a police officer specifically for homelessness. So there's something right there. We just need to wait for it so they can go and do it. We have county sheriff here. We have a chief of police here, and everybody. There's another sign. They're willing to work together too. So I think we all live here. We all care about our community, but we have a very, very complicated and expensive problem to deal with. I think we're going to hopefully get doing that. So ad hoc committee, I support that. Let's see, that's it. And you know, and one of my frustrations, I'll speak personally, is it's become almost politically correct to cower to someone. If they say they're homeless, suddenly it's a hands-off thing. They got attorneys behind their back and everything. But you know what? They have to be a good neighbor too. You can't be, if you're going to go through aluminum cans, I know the law is if you have your toter out there on the street, what they call expectation of privacy, you don't have it. So people can go through and get your cans, but if they're not going to bother to put the trash back in, you know, that's a problem too. The defecation, we all have those stories, right? It's amazing. But I appreciate everyone being here and understand that we have a very complicated problem before us. Before we leave tonight, I would like to get an ad hoc committee together to discuss what we've gone down here. That way we have some action items to move forward. But I also see some folks that would like to say a couple things, and I don't want to deny them that opportunity.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I think I have too been attending these homeless meetings since 3 or 4 years, and as a community member, very frustrated with the slow progress that the community perceives. I know progress has been made with these shelters, and we see the increased law enforcement in our neighborhood, but the community perception is that there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of committees, but there is little action. We've all seen tonight how much money is available, and I would hope that both of these councils would get together and go out and aggressively grab that money. And then through the ad hoc committee, present sites to the community with the emphasis of enforcement. And I don't mean that heavy-handed, I mean like they're doing on the Live Oak thing. When that site was presented, we're all concerned about the missing fence in the back. That's an important factor to the neighborhood. The important factor to the neighborhood is also that Salvation Army is going to monitor those people there. And I think if a site is chosen and then a way to monitor it, to present it to the communities and say, look we're not just dumping these people here and they're gonna, they just get this lot and they can do what they want with it. But rather, this is our plan on how to monitor them. So they will not be littering in your front yards or defecating in your front yards or, hanging out in your front yards or whatever. That you would get more support from those communities like, okay, that sounds good. Okay, it sounds clean. It sounds monitored. We can live with that. And it's my hope that that will be the message portrayed from the city council after they've spent most of their time getting that money for this community. So we can do something like that, because I think we do have a lot of areas available in this town to put something like a tent city, mobile home units. One place that was talked about was Richland Housing, supposedly has mobile home hookups in the back somewhere that aren't being used anymore. Okay, looking at sites around town. Thank you. And I'd like to be a part of the committee if there's open seats.
Good evening. Marcia Krause Taylor, and I'm a community member of Sutter County and Yuba City. I'm a person who likes to listen and sit and see what's going on before I speak, if I get that possibility. What I do want to do is identify myself as being both the executive director of Casa de Esperanza and also a board member for the Sutter Yuba Homeless Consortium. I'm really excited about the possibility of another ad hoc committee. I think the last ad hoc committee did some really good work. Whether we all agree with what happened or not and where it's going to be, it was good work that was done. So I applaud you for looking at another ad hoc committee. I, however, would like to try and shift the lens a little bit if I could, and to ask that ad hoc committee consider going upstream a bit. And by upstream, I mean, let's look at prevention. We're dealing with, something that is in our backyards right now, but I really think we need to look upstream. Working at the agency I do, that's what we're all about, is looking upstream, looking at prevention. So I'd like to propose a couple of thoughts. The first one is that when we talk about homelessness, there are those homeless who need to be managed because this is a lifestyle for them, and there are those homeless who want to get out. And I think when we're talking about those people who want to get out, we need to look at how do we prevent that? How do we prevent the loss of shelter? And what I propose is that we look at the fact that if you were to take someone who has lost their income and needed to help with their rent or utilities for a month, 2 months, 3 months, while they actively had someone supporting them to find another job, if that's what the case was, whatever the reason was that caused them to be homeless. But if you were actually to pay their rent for 3 months, maybe 6 months even, while they did that, you're going to save money compared to what it would be to house them. Much less to do cleanup, much less to have to deal with the fact that what we know about individuals who become homeless is that they often become homeless because they are isolated. There is no one for them to turn to. So they feel alone. And when they get into a community, whether it's a tent community or whether it's where they're parking or whatever it is, they find community. And if that's the community that they're looking for, it becomes it's an institutionalization that they feel more comfortable to stay there. So we have to make sure that we're supporting them not to be isolated to the point where they become homeless and then create a new community in which they wish to stay. And we can do that if we help them financially keep the shelter they currently have. The other prevention that we see all the time has to do with domestic violence itself. The leading cause for homelessness for women and children in the United States is domestic violence. So how do we deal with prevention when it comes to domestic violence? That takes a lot of education. That takes a community who says we will not tolerate violence in our homes and with our intimate partners. We don't do it. And that has to be something said loud and clear. It's still going to happen. So when that happens, we have to look at two types of batterers and two types of families. The first is that for some of those families in domestic violence, that batterer can be managed. And what that means, it may be safe for her to stay in her current home if he is removed through the courts and with the backup of law enforcement. And he's removed and she can stay in her home. So she doesn't become homeless. But there's another group of women, and this is the one that we see
Marcia,
most often.
we're kind of out of time here, but we understand that prevention is your point, and we agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Through
there's
the
some
mayor, she ought to be
oh,
happy is that she's going to get additional funding from the city of Yuba City for for Casa de Esperanza. That's ought to be that's
For
ought
a
to be
new
the-
site, for a
That's ought
new
to be
site.
great.
That's right. Knew there's a reason I liked you.
In the spirit of saving everybody's time, so the only thing I wanted to bring up is, Mayor Harris, what you brought up about all the elements that you wanted to see from the committee. Some of those elements are addressed in the Yuba Center Forward Manual and that living document that we have, but I think that we can absolutely plus that with an additional committee. But what I think that would be really smart to consider for this committee is that for every committee or group of people that are working on that are tasked with something specific, whether, it be a safe camping site, that can be there temporarily until X shelter opens up or what have you, and then have someone looking at housing and have someone looking at rental properties and someone taking an inventory of what properties are available throughout our community, that as long as the people, at least one person on those committees, is really astute with housing first practices, then it'll be successful, because that obviously is what we all know, is that we have to follow those housing first guidelines as like Bible, or else we're not going to receive the funding. And so I think that's a lot of the community at large. If they want to be part of that, we do maybe perhaps need to consider that opportunity to educate on what housing first is, because we need to follow those practices in all of these developing initiatives. So that's it. Thank you.
That's good info. Thank you.
Through the mayor, if there are no more public comments. I think city and county staff have heard from the Board of Supervisors and from the City Council loud and clear as to what direction you would like to go. Just wanted to remind you, this is technically a workshop tonight, so we can't take formal action, but we've heard which direction you want to go. It is entirely possible for staff to come back respectively to the county meeting and to the separate city meeting to get those two members for your committee, so that we can set it up and go through that process as well. That'll probably be the fastest way of doing it, rather than trying to do another joint meeting, but we're open to either approach.
I appreciate that. I agree with that. And also, give us time to solicit any interested community members. I would like to hear from them as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for that. Ma'am, you're standing up. You're frowning. Did you want to say something? Oh, your back is hurting. That's why you're frowning. All right. Well, hopefully, does anybody have any final comments? No? We're stepping in the right direction. Just keep in mind, we do have a lot of organizations out there always continually working on this thing. They're out there. There is some people say no one is doing anything. Couldn't be anything further from the truth. I think we just need to corral up our ideas and focus them together and jointly, so we can eliminate any redundancies and then get some results out there. So thank you for being patient with the meeting. There'll be more to follow, and we'll make sure we communicate that to you all. So thank you very much. We'll stand adjourned.